Welcome to Retro Groove. Enjoy your voyage.
Howdy and welcome to Retro Groove. I'm Adam C.
And I'm Liam D.
And this is a podcast where we talk about music that stands the test of time, the albums and artists that have shaped and reshaped the sonic landscape, as well as covering new music from those artists. I'd like to welcome you to our maiden voyage. This is our first episode, and I appreciate you being along with us for this adventure. Today we're going to be chatting about what we've been listening to recently, any recent purchases that we've made. Or we're going to go through some icebreaker questions to get to know each other and allow you, the listener, to get to know us a little bit. And then on the flip side, on side B, we're going to cover some new releases from some well-known artists. And then we're going to do an album spotlight on the new Black Keys record, Delta Cream. And we're going to talk about, I'm sure, plenty of other things as they come up. And I'm really, really excited. Liam, I want to thank you for agreeing to do this with me.
Yeah, I'm excited to do this too, man. I love music. I have many interesting relationships with it, and can't wait to chat a bunch about everything.
Yeah, definitely. So to kick it off, what have you been listening to recently? Any interesting recent purchases?
Yeah, so a lot of my current kind of listening habits, I have a 6-year-old daughter, so a lot of my listening is framed around both my schedule and also my time with her. So it's a lot of the more palatable, or what I think are more palatable, kind of classic music that I kind of wished that I was maybe exposed to when I was a little younger, or that
right.
I was hearing on the radio and might not be hearing it as much anymore. She also hears current pop radio, so there's some of that, but I've been throwing on a lot of Queen, some Weezer, nice. Oasis, Michael Jackson. She listened to a bunch of ABBA when she was younger. You know, there's just that stuff that's like very easy to listen to. My wife likes Elton John. Like, that's another one where it's just like, you can throw that on and she loves it in the car, and now she's singing along. It's a bunch of that. As far as buying stuff, I picked up the new Lord Huron album. They're amazing, like just this beautiful kind of nicely curated ethereal rock that's got like stories to it. I love a good story. And I picked up a couple of video game soundtracks, just trying to snag those when I can on vinyl. You know, the licensing mess that exists in that world makes the vinyl recordings and releases of those kind of erratic, and they're like bootleggy. And so I've definitely had a few like things that have come and gone without me even knowing about it, and I've been pretty bummed about it. There's an Earthworm Jim vinyl that apparently came out like 4 years ago that I just found out about recently, and looked it up, and it goes for $200, and it's just like I can't pull the trigger on something like that. But if I see it for $30 or $40 when it's initially released, I got to go for it. So, like Celeste and Hollow Knight, like some of these beautiful indie games that I've played recently, I grabbed those.
Oh yeah,
and then some of the like cover and interpretive, like the Zelda and Chill series. I got the second one of that recently, and it's just a good thing to throw on.
Really nice. Yeah, I have that first Zelda and Chill. And it's funny, we were talking about things, particularly the game soundtracks, how they just tend to skyrocket in price because they're probably low numbers and, you know, don't get a lot of represses.
Right.
I got that first Zelda and Chill for like $7 on clearance directly from the Materia Collective website. And now it's going for something like $70 or $80 on Discogs. So it's just insane how much they tend to skyrocket very soon after they come out. So good on you for picking up that Zelda and Chill 2. If it's still available, I might need to try to snag that before it starts the climb.
It is, yeah, and I feel like there's a kinship with the video game community that you and I are both a part of, obviously, in that sense, which I think you're also experiencing outside of video game soundtracks, right? But like you are definitely having this. If you don't pull the trigger immediately, you may never be able to have this thing again.
Oh yeah,
and that scarcity
at least not for
is tough.
a huge, price of entry.
Yeah, yeah. What about you? What have you picked up?
Well, probably too much if I'm being honest.
Mm-hmm.
But the main ones, I was finally able to secure the fully analog copy of the new My Bloody Valentine release of Loveless. Just came out on the 21st, and they actually reissued all three of their studio albums. And I had actually given up. It was one of those kind of things where the pre-orders sold out almost instantly. And then, I was seeing pre-orders on eBay going for $100 plus. So yeah, I'd basically given up, and I said, maybe someday I'll pay $100 or $150 for one of the good pressings, because there's a lot of unofficial bootleg pressings of this album. It's just a really interesting and unusual history as far as the pressings of this album go. It's got somewhat of a legendary status, particularly for guitar folks and indie folks, and I'm really happy to have finally gotten a good quality pressing. So thank you. Shout out to Breakaway Records in North Austin, because they had a handful of copies and they let me go ahead and buy it over the phone when I called them and asked them if they had any.
Nice.
And I actually don't even have it in my hand yet. I've paid for it. I need to go pick it up either later today or tomorrow. But I'm really happy to have that. Just a really interesting and beautiful album. It's hard to believe that came out in 1991.
Wow. Yeah, and shout out to Domino too for like acquiring the catalog and putting this thing back out there too. I know that album has like just as we were talking about legal messes on the soundtrack side, like that album's just, I mean, like the amount of money that went into producing that album, and then the band kind of fell apart after that for 20 years or something.
Right.
I'm sure that behind the scenes, the recoupment and contractual mess that led to it being reissued, I guess, what is that, 20 something years later? I'm doing the math. Like it's pretty crazy that it took that long.
Yeah. And I don't know if it was like, hey, it's the 30-year anniversary kind of thing, so they pushed for it. But yeah, I'm also really, really glad that they finally did that, because as much as I love the album and I have a personal connection to it, it's not one of those albums that I have to have so badly that I'd be willing to spend 150 plus on it. So I'm just really glad to have gotten it. And then speaking of bands that disappeared for a couple of decades, I picked up a little bit late to the party on this one, but I picked up We Will Always Love You by the Avalanches. And I was a fan of them before. I first heard them when I was working at Newbury Comics back in 2000, 2001. And that album, Since I Left You, was on repeat in the store. And so I have that in the back of my head a lot as a soundtrack that plays, particularly Frontier Psychiatrist, just because it's so crazy with all of the samples cutting in and out. Mm-hmm. But this album really surprised me in that they've gone in a different direction, where instead of being, almost entirely sample based, the samples are there, and then what they layer on top of that is, live instrumentation and bunch of guest artists coming in and singing. And I'm also a huge sucker for concept albums.
Yeah.
And this one in particular, you could argue that it's a concept album. Lots of overarching themes and spoken passages that come in and out in different parts of the record. There's actual recordings in the album from I'm gonna hopefully stay accurate on this. I'm not super well versed in this, but there's a gold disc that they produced, and I'm gonna have to look up this information because I'm gonna say it wrong. It's a lot of information, but they created this album with the assumption that some extraterrestrial beings will find this disc. And so they created this album of recordings and information that basically went to space in anticipation of, at some point they're going to find this album, some other, species or life form, and they're going to be able to play it somehow and find out all about Earth. So it's called the Golden Record, and I'm actually on the NASA website.
Yeah, it was on the Voyager. It was back in the 70s is what you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it was selected for NASA by a committee chaired by Carl Sagan, and each record is encased in a protective aluminum jacket together with a cartridge and a needle. Instructions in symbolic language explaining the origin of the spacecraft and indicate how the record is to be played. And the audio contains spoken greetings
In a bunch of different languages, I kind of remember, right?
Bunch of different languages.
Yeah. I remember that they put this out, like you could buy this on CD, which is really funny to think of. Back when I was a kid, I remember there was a story about it and you could buy it on CD. And I've gone back and I've looked at it. I mean, it's been years since, but I remember like scouring through eBay random stuff and seeing posts about it.
Yeah, it's just a really cool, and they sort of built, and even the album cover is the director of the project to put that together. And of course, you know, the name is escaping me now, but there's little snippets of that throughout the album, as well as, you know, broadcast transmissions and things like that. And the overarching theme of space, light, life and death, love, and all of that. And there's just so much beauty and overarching imagery in it. It's one of those life-changing albums for me. I'm really kind of obsessed with it. And it's one of those albums where I have to kind of make sure that I've carved out the time to listen to the entire thing, because once I start it, there's just no way that I'm going to be able to stop listening to it.
Right.
So, and you know, those are few and far between. What else did I purchase? Breakaway Records, speaking of them, they just recently opened back up for in-store shopping, whereas before it was curbside only.
It feels so good. It feels so good to be in a record store again.
Amazing. It's really amazing. It's something that just is therapy for me. Mm-hmm. So
same.
Being able to go in person is just such a different experience than, you know, looking through an online catalog or,
right,
you know, responding to Instagram posts like, hey, this is for sale. So I'm really, really happy about that. And I ended up picking up a couple of Electric Light Orchestra albums, trying to fill out my collection, because I am a huge E.L.O. fan, have been since I was a kid, with my parents having a New World Record in the house. And I picked up Eldorado and Time being the one album. It's their 1981 album that I was, you know, actually familiar with. Not really familiar with Eldorado, so I'm excited to dive into that. And so with those two purchases, I now have 7 of the 14 E.L.O. studio albums. And that is decidedly not counting the Xanadu soundtrack.
Which probably counts, right? Like, it is their music, or at least partially their music, composed for that.
I think they're all over side B.
Yeah. Yeah.
Side A is Olivia Newton-John, and then side B is mostly E.L.O., with the title track being at the very end. And I'm not against picking that up, but I'm not going to consider it an E.L.O. studio album.
Right. You don't if you're going for complete collection, maybe, but if you're just going for the studio albums, that makes sense. There's a Tom Petty album that's in a similar boat, although I think that's entirely composed by him for an Ed Burns movie called She's the One, and I'm not even that familiar with
that's right.
the album, the music from that movie, but I've definitely seen and heard conversations about people about whether or not that's technically in the like Tom Petty discography as a Tom Petty album, or if it's just a soundtrack that's got a lot of music that he composed for it. It's a nuance, yeah.
For sure. So I got those. I also picked up a 1975 Terre Haute pressing of Wish You Were Here.
Nice.
Which I actually picked up from a friend of mine back east. Shout out to Eric. He does a lot of record sales, and he does live Facebook shows where he sells records and stuff like that. And he invited me to one of his shows, and I bought a few records, and that was one of them that I was really, really excited about. So I'm really glad to have that. Should be in the mail on the way to me as we speak.
Okay, you haven't received it yet.
Haven't received it yet.
I was going to ask.
It's one of my favorites.
There's a poster inside a lot of those. I don't know which pressings had it and which ones don't, but there's like this really big like green moonscape, I think, or something poster inside that I always liked. That was in my parents' pressing, and I have it around here somewhere. So I'm curious to see if it has the poster inside, because there's all those like
I will report back.
Yeah, there's fun little inserts to some of those old records that are cool to kind of stumble across when you pick something up and then you pull it out and this other thing comes out and you're like, oh, I didn't even know I was buying this. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that stuff. The Avalanches album has a nice big poster inside too. It's like a big multicolored moon, and I would probably frame it and put it up, but it's got like the creases in it because it's folded over itself. So I love that kind of stuff. Bunch of other random, small purchases. I like to go thrifting and look for vintage audio equipment and stuff like that. And so I had got a couple of good finds there. I found a copy of Cream's Goodbye.
Cool.
I found, this is kind of funny. So I found a copy of Alice Cooper's, I've got it right here. I've got a copy of Alice Cooper's Constrictor.
Cool.
It's the one with him, being choked out by a python on the cover.
Right, as he does.
It's actually got an Amoeba Records price tag on it.
Oh wow.
Which is kind of cool.
Especially in Texas. You found it locally in Texas, right?
Yeah, at a Goodwill store.
Wow. Yeah. Somebody made the trek from California.
The other thing that made this kind of a hilarious find is that inside the jacket is not only, the record that is supposed to be in there.
Good.
But a copy of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road.
Oh my God.
By Elton John.
That's fantastic. I could use that right about now.
So now I'm on the lookout for a sleeve or a jacket for Goodbye Yellow Brick Road.
That's awesome.
I don't know where you buy just, record jackets without the disc in them. It's kind of like, where do you buy just a left shoe? But
probably a garage
so I've got
sale,
that.
Yard sale
that
or
was
something.
Yard sales. Actually, I think I need to check at Piranha Records in Round Rock, Texas, because they actually have a section of just jackets only that don't have the discs in them.
Cool.
So I'll have to go. That's also a good place if you want to, put artwork up on the wall. Just to find album covers and stuff like that. That's a good way to get that. So that was kind of funny. Some other things, but nothing too noteworthy. In the same vein that you were talking about, obviously I'm in the car a lot with my girls. I've got 2 daughters, and the older one is now, about to be 10 and starting to express more interest in, having her. She actually just recently asked me to give her access to Apple Music on her phone.
Cool.
So that was cool. And I had a moment the other day. We were listening to Plastic Beach by Gorillaz in the car, and it's just one that we have on pretty regularly. And a song ended, and I heard from the back seat, "Dad, can we hear that one again?"
Nice.
And it's she wanted to hear that, and I was like, "Yes, success."
Yeah.
So that was a cool little moment.
Yeah, that's
awesome. And then, of course, I've been listening to the new Black Keys album. and we'll talk about that on the flip side. But before we go too much further, we kind of just very recently met, me and Liam, in the Retrologic Discord group, where we found that we have, mutual fanboy status for, records and music. And so we started talking and we hit it off, and that's where the idea for the podcast came from. So we are going to do some icebreaker questions. And not only does that allow Liam and I to get to know each other, but you, the listener, to get to know us a little bit better as well. So do you want to hop into these icebreaker questions?
Yeah, I think so. And I think a good spot to start is kind of at the beginning, which is like how you feel or recall that you were either exposed to like popular recorded music, or if there was a certain type of music that you had somebody like slip you an album from at some point where it just kind of opened your eyes in a different way. I wonder how you like started engaging with it, because we all played, or a lot of us played instruments, and so we knew some classical stuff and row 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 your boat or whatever, but like when you actually discover the world of produced pop music as a lump, it's impactful, and it can be like a wild experience. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It can kind of shape the early years of your life.
For sure.
For me, I think like probably most people, my earliest popular music exposure was through my parents. And, I was born in 1982, so I was a kid in the mid 80s through all of the 80s. And when you were in the car in the 80s, you listened to the radio because we didn't have cell phones. I personally didn't have a Game Boy or anything. There were no iPads, so you listened to the radio. And I remember being very, very young and hearing, bands like Boston. I remember hearing Hall & Oates. So I have very early memories of these songs and them giving me kind of certain feelings that maybe I didn't quite understand yet. Yeah. But it impacted me enough that I can still remember being in the car at maybe 4 years old, 5 years old, and hearing these songs. And I remember to this day hearing those songs for the first time.
Cool.
So in addition to the radio, my parents had albums at home, Boston, like I mentioned, Electric Light Orchestra. My mom was a huge James Taylor fan. Oh. So there was always James Taylor being played. So some Moody Blues and stuff like that.
My mom loves Moody Blues.
Man, how can you not love the Moody Blues?
Yeah.
So those are my kind of early sparks. Cool. Getting to know, the realm of music outside of children's music. Yeah. And so I feel like I was thankfully in a prime position to be introduced to some really good stuff early on, and that set me, I think, on a pretty good path.
Yeah, I had a similar thing where, I remember MTV being on in the house. I was born in 84, so my recollection is definitely like very end of the 80s, but mainly early 90s. But I remember MTV being on. My dad was big on ZZ Top and Skynyrd and Crosby, Stills and Nash. Nice. So I grew up hearing that stuff at home and understanding it and liking, like my mom loves the Beach Boys, so I was like indoctrinated early and actually never lost my love for them. There were definitely some times when I thought the music that my parents listened to was lame, and I had somebody slip me some punk records in like middle school into high school, and I was like, oh, okay, here we go, yeah. And like that drove me to then like, I'm going to play power chords and be in a band and whatever. Definitely. But yeah, I remember, so I didn't have my own radio for whatever reason, but my sister did. Someone gave her a radio with 2 cassette decks on it. Didn't have a microphone, and but she didn't really use it, and so I would swipe it. It was this pink and yellow thing. And I'd sit there and I'd listen to the radio in my room, and I'd realize that, like, if I popped a cassette tape in, I could record these songs and then I could listen to them whenever I wanted to. And I remember hearing, this is such a random one, but I remember hearing James Brown's Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. Like, I distinctly remember, like, feeling really excited because I hit record at just the right time where, like, I captured it perfectly, and then I could, like, go back and listen to that as many times as I wanted to.
Yes.
And so I remember, like, riding my bike to the CVS down the block and getting, it was like a 3-pack of cassette tapes, and just sitting there listening to the radio when I had time or whatever, and just, like, trying to grab cool songs that I could just listen back to. And I didn't know what I was listening to. I don't even remember the station that I was listening to. It was like just the general whatever, but just pulling songs because I wanted to own them, and I wasn't familiar at that point. I was probably like 8, 7. I wasn't familiar with going to a record store yet. I didn't have the Wall or Coconuts or whatever. I think that was a localized thing to New York, but I didn't have a record
Coconuts.
Store. Yeah.
That's funny. I remember doing almost the exact same thing, and one of the things that I remember being so frustrating is when the DJ is talking over, like, the first 20 seconds of the song. And then the other thing that would happen to me from time to time is I would get a song and I'd be like, yes, I finally got that song I was trying to record. And then the tape would end before the song is over. So that was a different time for sure. And I remember doing the same thing with music videos. We didn't actually have cable. We didn't have MTV until probably the mid 90s. But then, when you had shows like 120 Minutes that would play more, edgy or indie kind of stuff, alternative, I would record the music videos onto VHS off the TV. And that's a completely foreign concept, or maybe has been for a couple generations now. But that's what I did, at least in the 90s.
Do you remember any of the music videos that you recorded?
Quite a few. I remember Sonic Youth.
Oh, wow.
I remember,
definitely 120 Minutes, because that's like, you're not seeing that during regular MTV.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I really wasn't a fan of, kind of normal daytime or primetime MTV. But at that point that's when I was going through my rebellious phase. I'm only going to listen to music that makes my parents angry. So, just noisy stuff like Sonic Youth. And I'm kind of drawing a blank right now. I've got to kind of dig back through the memory banks and try to remember all the music videos that I recorded.
Yeah.
A lot of live performances.
Yeah.
I remember recording, I actually recorded the broadcast of Nirvana Unplugged.
Oh, wow.
I remember that. So yeah, just stuff like that. I used to love live performances, and it was always kind of a rare treat on MTV to see a live performance. And so whenever they did those, whether it was, when they had the stupid spring break week and stuff like that, they would have live bands play, and they would broadcast it. And so I used to record those, because that, more so than the videos, is what really fascinated me, is the live performances.
Yeah. I definitely, it's funny that I didn't remember until you said it, but I do remember recording Money for Nothing by the Dire Straits, because that music video is just so cool. That 3D animation at the time was just so funky and cool. And I was into video games, and it kind of looked like a video game. Yeah. And so
it was very video game.
I definitely remember having that on a VHS tape and watching it a couple times. That's really funny. Like, I wouldn't have remembered it unless you just said it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure I didn't think about it before we started recording, so I'm gonna have to really think back and remember all of I wish I still had those tapes.
Yeah.
But that was definitely an interesting period in music history. Do you want to hit one more of these questions?
Yeah. What about the first? Because you play music, right? So what about the first kind of song or band or something that you played on a guitar or on an instrument that wasn't like in a school setting?
Yeah. That probably would have been Stone Temple Pilots.
Wow.
I remember taking my mom's acoustic guitar and working out, I think it was Plush. And that was the first kind of song that I was into as a, preteen
Yeah.
that I wanted to play.
Did you
And
feel like you could? Like it was just like you heard it and you're like, oh, I think I can do that? Or you're just like, I don't care. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to get it done.
Yeah, no, there was something about it that sounded like it was like the guitar part specifically was simple to me.
Right.
Now, full disclosure, I'm really only talking about like the intro.
Sure.
The bang, you know what I mean? Once you get into the verse, there's some funky chords in there that I couldn't figure out, but I didn't care. I just wanted to play that intro.
Yeah.
So that's the first song that I have memory of where I sat down and, this was basically pre-internet, or, the internet wasn't anything like what it is today where you could just, I wonder how to play this song, and you look up the tabs. That didn't exist.
Yeah.
So I had to sit there and work it out.
Yeah.
The only other one that I can remember really nailing was one of the songs off of the first self-titled Foo Fighters record.
All right.
And it was Big Me.
Okay.
Because it just has like simple chords, and because it's not distorted, you can kind of hear the chords. Mm-hmm. So I was able to take, the basic chords that I had learned and work it out. And so that's probably the second one that I can remember really being able to play the entire song start to finish.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely.
What about you?
I had a similar kind of thing. Again, a little bit later. Green Day just kind of took my school and my group of friends by storm at the time.
Oh yeah.
And so my dad, he plays like nylon string classical guitar. He's fantastic, and had some electric guitars sitting around from like bands that he played in, like local bands in the 80s. And so I remember swiping. I have it sitting over here. It's an old Roland Jazz Chorus amp. And he had this like knockoff Black Beauty. Like it's not a Les Paul, it's something else, but he had this like knockoff like Les Paul looking guitar. And I remember bringing both of lugging this huge amp up to my room, which didn't stay there long because it was too loud. But I remember just
very heavy amp as well.
I remember getting it to a point where like I had enough gain and garbage cranked up where I could get it chunky sounding and figured out bar chords. And I remember my dad coming in and being like, let me show you how to like finger pick. Let me show you how to like play guitar. And I'm like, no, Dad, I'm gonna rock. Like,
let me do it.
I'm gonna play Basket Case or When I Come Around. And and so it was those. And then like I heard about the Ramones, and obviously like any of those bands where it's 4 chords, right? Like you can figure it out. Like you said, like eventually we had tabs and chord stuff that you could look up online, and so we were able to kind of learn it and read it, but it was a lot of that kind of mining and messing around until you figured it out, and then like finding like-minded people in your circle or in your school that also wanted to do that kind of stuff, and just feeding off of it. And I got a pedal, and then suddenly I kind of could sound like those records. But yeah, man, like that like punk resurgence in the like early to mid 90s, which led into pop punk, was and I still love that era and that music. Like it was such a thing for me because it like gave me the feeling like I could be in those bands. Like we went into a garage and we made the music that those bands were on MTV performing.
Yeah, totally. I had a very similar experience, and it's great when you can find a group of friends that also play. And because again, being mostly pre-internet, you learned how to play the songs that you couldn't figure out on your own by having other people teach you. So I ended up in a number of different, bands throughout my middle and high school years. And it wasn't until I kind of tried to, on purpose, branch out and learn more. I took lessons for guitar for about 6 months or so. And I was like, I want to learn Stairway to Heaven.
Oh, man.
And my guitar teacher was like, are you sure? Because you don't practice. He's like, I'm happy to teach you, but I don't want to waste my time. And, you know, I can tell when you come in here that you don't practice, or you at least don't practice the drills and the things that I wanted you to practice.
Yeah.
You're practicing other stuff.
Yeah.
Because I would come into the guitar lesson and be like, hey, listen to this. And then be like, I figured out Beat on the Brat or something. So, but I wanted to expand what I could do. So I sat down and I actually, you know, practiced it. And he showed me, you know, the correct fingering.
Yeah.
And to this day, I still can play, you know, the intro to...
So you learned it. You learned it. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I saw Wayne's World and I was like, oh no, I'm not allowed to play that song.
My dad actually plays music. Like, he's the music director at our church, and he will, just because he's being fun or whatever, like he's noodling around, you'll definitely hear that and other things that like get mixed into his like generic noodling. Like he'll just like you'll see heads turn where like, he's playing Zeppelin over there. Like, what is going on? And then he'll like move on to something else. It's really funny. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes that's involuntary just because it's inside of you.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some times where that's intentional. I've had those experiences before as well.
Cool.
We've got a lot of these questions, but if we keep going through these questions, which I'm really, really enjoying and are sparking fantastic conversation. But this episode will be 3 hours long if we go through all of these. So that's actually a good thing. We can save a lot of these for future episodes.
For sure.
And I definitely think we're about ready to flip it over and listen to side B. What do you think?
Let's do it.
Welcome to Retro Groove. Enjoy your voyage. Retro Groove.
All right, we are back. Thank you for sticking with us and flipping over to side B. And right now we're going to get into some new music from some, I guess you could call retro artists. I know it's hard to think about, you know, artists that kind of started to make themselves known in the early 2000s as you know, classic or retro, but it's been 20 years, man. It's crazy to think about how much time has elapsed.
Yeah, I mean, especially when there's so much conversation about new music, as there should be. Like, I do still love listening to pop radio and top 40 or whatever, and hearing what's happening now and the resurgence of certain sounds and the inventions of others. But I do think there's a lot to be said about putting a spotlight on these artists that we grew up with or we grew up inspired by, and they're still out there. They're making great music. And yeah, I think it's important to kind of, it's easy to lose sight of that when there's so much music coming out now. Sometimes you don't even realize. I mean, this first one I have marked here, the Counting Crows. I didn't even know. I didn't know for a few years that they put out a new album in 2014. I was talking to a buddy of mine, and it was a couple weeks ago, because when I heard that there was new music coming out, they put out a new 4-song EP called Butter Miracle Sweet 1 rather, and I was saying, man, it's been a long time, because the last album I remembered was a covers album of obscure, like, deep cuts that they just wanted to perform. Like, they didn't do the normal hits and whatnot. They pulled random songs and played that. And they're also a band that when they tour, They jam. They don't play the hits. Some people get really upset about it, so you might not hear Mr. Jones.
Of course not. They're probably so sick of that song.
They are, yeah, for sure. And so I was saying that it's been so long, and he's like, well, it's only been like 6 or 7 years, which is still a long time. And I had to go back and rediscover that there was a new album in 2014. So stuff can pass you by very easily, but Counting Crows is just... I've had an on and off history with them. I was a big fan of theirs in high school, and then kind of fell off in college and was re-exposed to them, just outside of college. And they're talented. I mean, it's a big group it's a big band. It's like 7 or 8 guys, but it's Adam Duritz's brainchild. The new single's Elevator Boots. It really feels like just classic Counting Crows. You can tell he went off and recorded it or came up and was inspired. He like camped out on a farm in England and just wrote by himself, like all alone, and it came to him. Wow. So it's 4 songs only. They're meant to be listened to front to back. I mean, it's fantastic. Definitely worth a listen.
Yeah, I need to check out the EP. I heard the single on the local station here, KUTX, but and I liked it, but it made me think back, and that first Counting Crows record was my first CD that I ever purchased.
Oh man.
And so that was, because it was my first CD, that's the only one that I had for quite a while. And so I have really fond memories of that album and learning to play songs off of that album. But after that, I kind of, went into my, punk and noisy, experimental rock phase and never really caught back up with what they were doing. But now I'm definitely going to check out that EP. That sounds, plus I'm an older dude. I'm a dad now, so it might be closer to some of the dad rock that
for sure
that I'm more acquainted with now.
Yeah. Well, speaking of a band that you probably then were slipping over to, so Weezer, I mean, just prolific always, right? Like, I think the biggest gap was between the second and third album, historically, I think it was 5 years. And then there's never been, just to think that, so the Green album was in 2001. So we're 20 years now into it from that album, which is the third album. And we haven't gone 2 or 3 years without having a new proper release from Weezer. And then they've always put out other random one-offs and singles and stuff. Just constantly cranking stuff out, reinventing themselves. A band that I feel like we're going to get into a similar conversation when we talk about the Black Keys, but have always kind of had to cope with people looking back on some of their earlier recordings and asking why they can't just do that again.
Right.
But if you go through their discography, the 15 albums now, there's so much there and there's so much diversity. And if you can just resign or allow yourself to kind of go on that trip with that band to just let Rivers and those guys do what they want, there's a ton of gold, man. That guy he's fantastic. Legend.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm probably still the needle for me is just slightly more in the camp of, ignoring anything that happened after Pinkerton. Yeah. And I try not to be that guy, but you make a good point in that, the songwriting speaks for itself, and of course there's always going to be some stinkers, but there are some really good songs if you dig for them. And I remember seeing Weezer at a small club in Boston. I believe it would have been 99 or 2000. And they played at the Axis, and it's just a small 2,000 person club, like right across the street from Fenway Park. And I had seen them previously in concert, opening up for No Doubt, actually, when they were touring for Pinkerton. Mm-hmm. But this was before the Green album came out, so they were playing with a lot of these kind of newer songs that didn't sound really anything like Pinkerton,
right?
And sounded more like they were trying to get back to the more, pop sensibility songs from the Blue album.
Right.
And it was a little bit surreal. It was interesting. Actually, I had heard a few of the songs before because this was in the very early days of Napster, where you might be able to search for an artist and find some, weird, like, someone recorded them playing this song and then turned it into an MP3 and put it on Napster.
Yeah, and the song title's wrong. Like you're calling it one thing and it's not that at all. Yeah,
exactly. Because it's just some kid putting it in there. So
yeah.
But that was an interesting experience. And then when Green Album came out, I do remember being disappointed.
Yeah.
And not that there weren't good songs on the album.
Sure.
And, one or two of those songs we actually played in the band that I was in at the time.
Oh, man.
But just because I think I was such a huge Weezer fan, from when, the Blue album blew up and Pinkerton came out, I was a huge fan of Pinkerton. And I think it was just because it was during those really early formative years that the later stuff, it doesn't quite connect with me, even though I can say, okay, objectively, this is a good song. It just doesn't shred my heart like Pinkerton does.
Yeah, I hear that for sure. I feel like I know Dan's a massive fan, so I feel like we'll save the rest of the Weezer talk for a future episode when we get to hang with him.
Definitely.
But I will point out that they're a band like many others right now that are about to hit the road. They're going out with Green Day and Fall Out Boy, all of whom are like managed by the same company. It's the Hella Mega Tour, and it's the kind of thing where when I think of how long it's been since I haven't been to a concert, I'm not one for big arena shows. Like that's not usually my style, but I do think I think that there's something appealing about just maybe going to one bombastic, over the top, hit laden, beat you over the head concert later this year to just be like, all right, it's been so long, let me just do a blowout,
get back into it.
And that lineup, while it's cheesy, like there's also if the set list is right for those three bands, it could be fantastic. So check out the Hella Mega Tour. It looks like it's going to be. It was supposed to happen in 2020, like 2019 into 2020, and obviously everything got pushed. So yeah, they're ready to go.
And I'm definitely not the biggest Green Day fan, but they put on an excellent live show. They put on a fantastic live show.
Yeah. And then I think one more that I'd throw out here. I mean, there's a ton of great stuff. There's Wallflowers and Garbage. I mean, Billy Gibbons has got a new solo album, which is it's just going to be great. But I think also we'll touch on him when we're talking Black Keys too.
For sure.
But I would mention Modest Mouse. I mean, they had their hit moment. They probably had like 2 or 3 songs that you could qualify as hits, right? But they've always been producing good, like a Modest Mouse song when you hear it. And they do disappear for a little while. They're a band that like there will be 4 or 5 years between an album, but they're consistent. Yeah. They're consistent. To me, it's akin to the Mountain Goats, where like I will just order the vinyl or just buy the music or whatever it is without really hearing much from it, because I know that even if it's a departure, it's not going to be so alienating that it's going to, that I'm not going to like it, that I'm going to regret spending the $13-14 on the CD or whatever it is. I kind of trust. I know what they make and I like what they make. So new album is coming out in June. There's a new single out now. It's called We Are Between. Haven't
heard it yet.
Yeah, they're great. Definitely worth checking out.
I'll need to check out the single. Yeah, they're one of the few groups kind of from that indie surge in the late 90s, early 2000s that actually, kept making music.
Yeah.
And didn't, drug overdose or just fall apart. So, I was never the biggest fan, but the stuff that I did hear, I really did like and appreciate what they were doing.
Yeah.
So I'm glad they're still making music, and I'm definitely looking forward to hearing the new album.
Yeah, I think that they're viewed, but probably in the history books of pop music as a one-hit wonder, probably. And you could say the same for a band like Death Cab for Cutie, who are in a similar boat. They've just they made a bunch of albums before they became famous.
Music.
Yep, they just kept doing it, and every once in a while it came back around. So definitely worth checking that out. And then our main thing that we're going to be talking about here, which is Black Keys Delta Cream.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So I don't know how much you've gotten to dig into it, but I literally just randomly happened upon the fact that they even had a new album. I've just been in such a mode of not paying attention to what new stuff is coming out. At least I was in these last, couple of months with so much going on. That I stumbled upon it because I wanted to listen to a particular album of theirs. And when you go to their page on Apple Music, they have a new album coming out. And so I didn't even know at first what they were doing, which is going back to their roots and putting out an album of Mississippi Delta blues covers front to back. And if you are like me and picked up as a Black Keys fan with Brothers or anything after that, this album is going to sound very different from the Black Keys that you're used to. And the reason for that is they literally went back to their roots, playing Delta blues covers. And it was interesting to go back and research. Most of the album consists of Junior Kimbrough songs. It's like half of the album is Junior Kimbrough or R.L. Burnside. Yeah. And not only that, but they had R.L.'s and Junior Kimbrough's couple of their studio musicians that they would play with sit in on the record with them. Yeah. And that just adds a whole nother air to it. It's really, really cool. It's a very laid back album. It is more in line with their early work. If you go back and listen to their first record, it's more similar to that because you go back to the first record and, look, a Junior Kimbrough cover. Yeah. So with that kind of more rhythmic, you kind of just picture them leaning back in a chair in the studio. They're not necessarily rocking out like the last record. They are just in the pocket, and it's kind of interesting to listen to there's that studio banter right at the beginning, right, where you hear are you ready? And he'll go, yep. And then they kind of start the song. You know what I mean? It's more loosey goosey. Sometimes some of the endings are a little bit sloppy to where you can almost picture them being looking at each other this feels like a good place to stop, and then kind of fumbling but it's still a super high quality record, but it's not, polished. And that, I think that's what's so great about it, actually.
Yeah, I'd say, so if you go back to that first album, which was their demos that kind of turned into that, there was a Muddy Waters cover, there was a Beatles cover, there was a Junior cover, R.L. Burnside. That's what their bread and butter was on that. And that was at a time just like, I think that those parts of Delta Cream are a callback to their first 4 albums really being done in a very DIY manner. 3 of them were just done in a basement with a 8-track recorder. And they were they were basically doing that before. I think that there's a little bit of a bristling, like I said earlier. I think that there are some people who just wish that they would go back and do Thick Freakness again. Right. And I think that when you put that record on with this one, you can hear the difference. That the last album, I'll say, Let's Rock, I actually missed initially, and then when I heard it, I decided to buy that on vinyl because I knew that I would just want to sit there and listen to that whole thing. Whereas El Camino I have on CD. It's a great album cover to cover, but there's songs that I want to hear on that, and so you get that production value that they've kind of crafted since having to do this in a basement, or as in the third one in an actual old factory that they rented out, and instead you have the sentiment and the licks and the chops of that, and the respect, I should say, of those early recordings, but it does have that sheen on it of it's high quality, man. It is clean, and the grittiness is clean. Like it is so well put together. And it retains some of that DIY feel, but definitely is it takes these songs and makes them into something that you could hear at a stadium show or at a big arena or something.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So with all of the emphasis in the last few years on artists using samples and really highly polished digital everything, I think this album is particularly refreshing with just their approach to it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? 4 guys in a studio, one take. Let's just bang out some songs, record it over something like 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
And boom, it's a dope record.
I also really like where this band is at right now. I mean,
they could do anything.
Yeah, but you came in at Brothers, which at this point was, I think that was 2008, something like that. So we're looking at like almost 15 years ago, when like Attack and Release and Brothers and El Camino were all coming out and they broke through. But they had those massive hits and that like explosive success, going from Fat Possum, which is, historically like from the 90s, a Delta Blues label, or it was founded as that. And then they got signed to that label, and then launched their career on Warner, or on Nonesuch, part of Warner. And so they grew this kind of sound that has, I think, then they took a break. Like they stopped. Turn Blue came out. They had a bunch of stuff going on. You could kind of feel that each of them had desires of what they wanted to do. There's some psychedelia that's going on Turn Blue that when you listen to Dan's solo album, and when you listen to the Arcs, the other band that he founded, you can kind of hear him getting that out and messing around with that and getting his hands dirty over there. And Pat has gone and produced a bunch of great records. He did a great one with Tennis, who was also on Fat Possum, but they're a great indie band. He did Michelle Branch's album. And he's played drums in a couple bands. Yeah, that's his wife,
actually.
Yeah, that's his wife.
For those that don't know.
Yeah.
The drummer for the Black Keys married Michelle Branch.
That's right, yeah.
There's some little music trivia for you.
And so it seems like they needed to go off, they had their trajectory, and I think they needed to go off. And then when they came back for the Let's Rock, it was still had that blues heritage, but it felt, I mean, for me, I heard ZZ Top all over it, man. I like it, the fuzz, and like the just attitude of that album.
Garage rock.
Yeah, it was so good. And then to have this be the follow-up, and obviously the pandemic has kind of impacted everybody's trajectory on what they are doing, but to have this as the follow-up just seems so perfect. For them to kind of go back, revisit their roots with this new kind of reinvigorated perspective as a band. I mean, this is a band that at their heights was being licensed for Victoria's Secret commercials and Nissan commercials. And dude, like they actually made quote unquote selling out cool, where it was just like, we have such a unique sound and we don't care and just go for it.
Yeah.
And it was so big. I don't know if you remember this at all, but there was a Pizza Hut commercial that like, I remember hearing that and being like, dude, what is going on right now? And then there was an actual lawsuit over it because it's one of those things.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it wasn't the actual recorded material, but it was Like it sounded. If you should go back and find the pizza thing. We'll stick it in the show notes. You can find it on YouTube. But when you listen to it, it's gold on the ceiling. But it's like either they just sampled it in a way, or they just had somebody record something that sounded so much like it that they didn't have to pay the band, and the band sued Pizza Hut, and it turned into a whole thing. So they're a band that were at that level, and are still there. I mean, if you try to list off, the 10 biggest rock bands that are currently like of recent mind. That are currently touring, they're probably still up there. I mean, like you think about the Foo Fighters and whatnot, but like the Black Keys are still selling out arenas, still like big, massive touring generators. And I can't wait to see what they do next. I had tickets to
go see them with Gary Clark Jr. last summer before that show got canceled, which I'm still, obviously it's understandable, but I'm still upset about missing that show. And yeah, it was the kind of thing where those tickets went fast.
Yeah.
And
man, that's gonna be a great show, by the way. I'm assuming they're gonna reschedule it. Have they?
I hope so. I haven't gotten any announcements about it yet, but I will, pay the ridiculous amount of money that I paid, again.
Yeah.
Thankfully got refunded, of course, but I will definitely go see that show.
Yeah. Gary Clark Jr. is a beast, man. I mean, if you talk about somebody, not to go off on a tangent, but you talk about somebody who's just...
We love tangents.
Just carrying, like, the torch of so many different great genres, obviously blues, but even just Hendrix level rock and whatnot. Like, there's just so many things that guy embodies. I bought my parents tickets. I should have bought myself one, but it was like a present. I bought my parents tickets to an Eric Clapton concert a few years back, and he was opening, and I was like, you just need to make sure you get there early, because they're like, hey, we're going to go out to dinner, we're going to spend some time, whatever, we'll slip in when it's time. I'm like, no, you need to be there for Gary Clark. You don't want to miss Gary Clark Jr. And my dad, again, a guitarist, came back and he was like, yeah, that's a good call. Yeah, that was fantastic. That guy's insane. His stage presence is he's got a weird bravado to it that my dad didn't dig, but I love a front man too. I love a swagger, and he's great. And obviously Eric Clapton's a legend. But yeah, like I was like, Dad, like trying to get your dad or your parents to listen to some stuff sometimes is a process. Yeah. So I get one of those wins.
Stuff like the Black Keys and Gary Clark Jr., if there is a common thread that they would appreciate, it's a lot easier to be like, hey, you like, such and such, you like Eric Clapton, you're going to like this, you know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that's what I've used throughout the years to get people into something that they might not immediately want to invest the time to find out about on their own.
Right. Well, I would definitely suggest people check it out. I just can't wait to see what they do next. I mean, this band did 3 albums, some of their biggest, with Danger Mouse, but then decided not to go back to that well for the last one, and not for this one either. So I'm interested to see. This could be one of those things where they try to go back to Danger Mouse again, or a future episode we should talk about different producers a bunch, because producers, if people aren't cued in, are just they're so impactful on your favorite bands and your favorite albums, and there's a part of me that would be interested to see what the new focus of the Black Keys would do with Danger Mouse, who helped them curate their massive hits. But there's a part of me that doesn't want them to go back there. There's a part of me that just says, that happened, and it was what it was. Those songs are always there, and now go sit with somebody else. Now go figure something else out. So I'm excited to see what happens.
I agree with that. As much of a fan of Danger Mouse as I am, I definitely agree with you. Turn Blue is amazing and unique for them, and I'm very glad that they did it, and I love that album. But yeah, let's see what they do with Rick Ross. You know what I mean? Let's see what they do with other producers. You know what I mean?
That Black Rock album with Dame Dash, it had Q-Tip on it and Talib. Like, That's one that slipped under my radar when it first came out, but they did a hip hop album back in 2009, 2010. Like Damon Dash heard about them and decided he wanted to do a project with them and brought in, I mean, you look at the lineup on that and it's bananas. So should check out Black Rock as well too. So before we wrap up here, I do kind of want to put you on the spot with one thing, though, in this conversation. House is on fire. You've got every Black Keys album spread out in front of you. Which one are you grabbing out to run out the door with? Like, what's the one album that you're like, I have to have it? And I could start if you want a second to think about it.
So I'm gonna go with my like first initial thought, so I'm not overthinking this. And visualizing it in my brain, I grabbed Brothers.
Okay.
And it may simply be because that was my first Black Keys record. Mm-hmm. And I can still to this day listen to it front to back and then just want to start it from the very beginning all over again. Yeah. And I love a bunch of their records, but and it literally could simply be the fact that that's the first album of theirs that I had. So I'm just going to stick with that.
Right. Well, I'm actually going to go similarly. I probably will do the cheesy thing and grab El Camino. It's
not cheesy.
It's, Thick Freakness, Rubber Factory is great. Like those early records are fantastic, and I am revisiting and loving Let's Rock right now, and that might in the future kind of supersede this. But El Camino to me, it's just they figured it out. You know, they had done Brothers, and Brothers was such a home run for them. And they quickly went back into the studio. They didn't go out. I think they were a little burnt out too. But instead of doing that like long cycle to the next thing, they just went back into the studio and cranked out this album that has just hit after hit after hit. And the in between songs are great too. I know, like I said, like I jump around on that album. I don't listen cover to cover, but man, like what they pulled off on that album, like I think that's going to go down in history for them as just like it's such a moment in time and in music, like the impact that they had, I'm sure, on future generations with some of those songs. You hear Gold on the Ceiling or Little Black Submarines or Lonely Boy, like it's insane that a band that sounds like that blew up so big when they did, and just they hit the mark, because you hear those early songs that they did that like rough, but it's got soul, and it just like it feels like things clicked. It feels like between Danger Mouse and those two guys, they just figured out the formula and they baked it and it came out perfect. So that's my like House on Fire. I've got to grab
House is on Fire album. I'd be grabbing everything, but
for sure, kids,
I
cats,
get the
whatever,
thought exercise.
Well, cool, man. This was great.
Absolutely, and I want to thank all of y'all for listening in, and hope you enjoyed it, because we are going to continue. And if there's albums or bands that you'd like us to talk about, you can join the Discord. But this has been Retro Groove. We are part of the Retro Logic Network. Check out the website retrologic.games for social links, merch, community, and more. That's who we're connected with right now. Awesome little community of retro gamers and music fans and the like. And we would be excited for you to join the community with us. Thanks for listening. Y'all have a safe week.